Okay, looks like we've got quite a group of people who joined us today. Thanks a lot for making time on your busy Thursday to sit down with us. I'm Mark Walker. I'm the CEO of StrongPoint, and I'm going to be talking today about how to accelerate your Center of Excellence. Primarily, when we're talking about this, we're talking about Salesforce orgs. So if some of you have other applications, you may be running into the same sorts of issues. Primarily, we're going to talk about it in concept first, and then we're going to show you some very specific things that we do inside our software to help make these best practices much easier to achieve. So we'll cover what is a Center of Excellence. Some of you may already have a Center of Excellence and you're looking to make it more efficient, get more productivity out of your team, not just in the Center of Excellence, but also out of the team that works with them, the dev and IT and admin and BA teams that work around it. Others may be looking to set up a Center of Excellence. You presently don't have one, or you don't have a change committee. That's another way of thinking about it. And you're looking to figure out how to do that, and you're wondering, well, wait a second, aren't the people on that committee going to be the same people that I already need to do all the things I'm doing to Salesforce? So we're going to talk about that challenge. We're going to talk about the challenges that business users see and executives see in the operation of change centers of excellence, and then talk about what the root causes of those are, and some strategies you can take, whether or not you use their software, to accelerate or to relieve some of those burdens. And then we're going to start talking about automating risk decisioning. This will become more clear when we get into it, but how do you fundamentally what a Center of Excellence is doing is managing risk, right? Managing risk and communication, how we can automate some of that. We'll give you a quick demo. I'm not in any way going to attempt to show you the full capabilities of our platform. That's not the objective today. It's to share some things that we've learned working with customers about ways in which people are accelerating things in very significant ways. So first of all, what is a Salesforce Center of Excellence? So the way Salesforce describes it is that it's a committee for key stakeholders to stay aligned on improvements and updates to the Salesforce platform. And I think that's the narrowest definition of what it is. In many of our customers, it's a group of committees of people who perform different functions around that objective. So there may be executive participants who are gating whether or not something is a good idea. We've certainly heard that from customers like Amex and ACOM, that there's that type of function going on. Then there's certainly a technical review committee, people who are actually looking at the ideas that seem like a business priority and judging the technical risk of that and looking at resourcing and the capabilities of your internal or in some cases external teams in order to get that done. And then there's a governance function. Right? There's a governance function that is responsible for the communication change inside the organization and the monitoring of the behavior of everybody else in the change aspect of the organization. So all the people who are the participants in the change process, from the business users all the way through to the deployment engineers, and making sure that they're following the best practices. So in the broadest scope, it's providing IT governance over the entire system. I love this quote though from a VP of Sales Ops. The business user's perspective on this though is that a change or a Center of Excellence is often where good ideas go to die, right? And the reason this person's feeling this frustration, and we've heard this again and again from the business users, is because they have very, very simple changes that they try to get moving forward, and those things don't move forward. And the tension this produces is remarkable. I'm sure everybody who actually joined this call felt it. The way we like to describe it is nobody's ever said we missed our numbers, but way to go in the change control, right? But people have definitely said we missed our numbers because we messed up our systems and weren't able to deliver, right? And that's the tension we feel. If we don't do good governance and don't follow best practices, we break things, or we cause unexpected changes, or in the worst case scenario, we actually cause bad business decisions because we actually mess up the data. And if we don't change things, we are unable to meet growing demands from the company, and the company's not able to be agile. So we're trying to our objective today is to talk about ways in which we can facilitate the first part, which is absolutely vital to the ongoing life of the company, regardless of the size of company or team that you have, without incurring this second part where good ideas go to die. So Gartner has taken a lot of look at this, and so from a Gartner report where they pointed out that what actually happens, the reason why these two perceptions are going on is that when you have limited resources, what ends up happening is the very, very important strategic technology and strategic business projects and the lights on projects, the maintenance work, that takes up almost the entirety of the dev resources. And when we think of dev resources, we can think of all of the resources, including the time and attention of your center of excellence and all the participants in it, because the rigor required to go through and do these things properly consumes all the resources. And unfortunately, what doesn't get through are some very, very specific business and operational projects that would really deliver a lot of value to the business if only you could get them moving forward. And when it's happening is they get caught, right? And so I'll give you an example. One of our customers said, or the VP of Sales Ops said, I can't understand why it takes 2 months to change a pick list, right? And because the pick list can't change, the reporting can't change, the marketing process they want to roll out can't change, they can't start gathering the data, their entire project drifts. And the reason is not because it takes 2 months to change a pick list, it takes about 45 seconds to change a pick list. It's because in order, as we all know, the potential outcome of changing that pick list could be nothing, or it could be fry your data forever. And it's going to be somewhere on that spectrum, and the only way to avoid it is to do proper governance, proper impact analysis, proper risk assessments. But the way in which it's being done is causing those things to either proceed very slowly or in some cases not proceed at all. So so what is happening is this result is a function of a bunch of different steps in the process. So on the left-hand side, we have a whole bunch of different types of projects. Some of them are red hot, important things. Some of them are good ideas. Some of them have big scope. Some of them have little tiny scope. And the subject matter experts and the executives identify needed changes in the system. And then that's usually, for most people, passed on to admins or BAs or somebody before the dev team gets involved. And they are being tasked with making sure we fully understand the business case. And there's too many of them on the left-hand side to actually run the business case to ground. So some prioritization, selection happens, which may be actually thoughtful, in best well-run companies is thoughtful prioritization selection, but is often in many cases, who yells loudest gets prioritized. And you end up with a sub-selection of those things. So only about half of the things sort of make it through that stage. And that may vary company by company, of course. But then what happens is, of the things that did get a business case done, they now have to go through a risk assessment, because somebody has to go through and say, well, great, before we can resource this, we have to understand what other things it would affect, how much complexity is involved, how much regression testing we're going to do, what exactly we're going to need in terms of regression testing. And that starts to involve the dev team. Now the dev team, unless you're in a very unusual organization, is already maxed out, right? Burned in, qualified Salesforce developers that are as rare as hen's teeth in today's market. So those people are already 100% consumed, so they can't possibly consume everything that the BAs and admins looked at, and they can't consume everything that the business users wanted, hence our frustrated VP of Sales Ops. And so only a subset of those things actually get out into the approval at the Center of Excellence review. Now, if you flip that around, all that happens is the Center of Excellence gets overwhelmed with half thought out ideas. So it has to go this way. And then what we get into is that the Center of Excellence can only possibly go through these very detailed risk assessments against a limited number of things. And generally what happens out the other side is a small number of big initiatives get through. Now, this is a bit of an over dramatization just because the diagram doesn't work. You could sprinkle in a few things because, of course, some small things get done. But we tend to hear that what we tend to be hearing is that we have relatively long release cycles compared to business user expectation. So business user expects it now. Release cycle is, every 3 weeks to every month or two. And mostly what's getting prioritized are things that make a very significant change to the organization because you're under-resourced. So really when you're looking at this, we need to understand that the things that are not getting done, this sort of like gap down here, these are really things that could be done by BAs and admins. So we layer on top of this, the professional developers deal with the very, very high priority stuff. And then all these other resources we have in the company are available to deal with the low-hanging fruit, the things that are not that complicated. The problem is, and I'm sure it's going through your heads right now, is you cannot tell without doing all the rigor that we just talked about, which is in which bucket. Because you could have one pick list, you could pick this with exactly the same values. You could have list views that are exactly the same. You could have almost any object or customization that you could think of. You could have two fields on the same object could have dramatically different risk, right? And when we're thinking about risk, we're not just thinking about technical risk, we're thinking about organizational risk. How often is this used? Who uses it? Think of two reports, one you spun up yesterday and another one that's used by the VP of sales to report money up to revenue projections up to the CFO that eventually go to the SEC. The risk associated with changing things that those depend upon is massively different. Right? So we can't pass that stuff off unless we've already done the risk assessment, but we needed dev resources to do the risk assessment. And so what we're really starting to think about is if we could redistribute this work, we could get a heck of a lot more done, but we need to redistribute it with rigor. So the key to this is that you need to move the risk assessment even further forward. So remember we saw back here that the risk assessment was happening sort of in the middle of the process right before approval. Well, we actually need to move the risk assessment all the way out to the edge. And we need to move it out to the places where people are actually creating the demand. So places like ServiceNow or Jira or Salesforce cases or other ticketing systems. And we need to basically be able to have somebody create a ticket or even just investigate whether they wanted to create a ticket and immediately understand what the downstream risk is likely to be. Because if we do that, we can gate things really easily and we can gate them into different buckets. So we can say, this change, anybody can do it. Think your own report that you made yesterday, right? This change, the subject matter experts can change it. In other words, the people who own those reports can change their own reports. That's fine, right? Think the next type of change, it could be the subject matter experts can do this, but they need approval. In other words, these are protected by change policies and there's dependencies on it, but they're not necessarily very complex technical dependencies. So we can let non-developers make these changes. We may decide that we want them to do in sandbox first. That might be the right process, but we want to go through an approval process, but it's actually a business approval process. So for example, you might have a subject matter expert who is the person responsible for maintaining a report, but they need to get approval from the CFO or the CRO who owns the report. And then we have things that could be done by admins and functional developers. Definitely the sort of things that you would do in Sandbox. You might say, for example, you can create a new workflow as long as it doesn't actually touch anything that already has workflows or scripting against it, because those things require our dev team to think through the complex interaction that the two pieces of automation would have. But if you're just doing something new, sure, admins and functional developers, you do it in sandbox, we go through a lighter change approval process and you bring it into production. Or think of changing the pick list that didn't have downstream dependencies. You could do that in a very, very shortened change management process because you know for sure, or if you knew for sure, that there was no downstream risk. And of course, some of these things, and actually in our view, when we looked at the data of our customers, in terms of volume of things that get changed, only about 5% of things are actually things that actually touch existing scripting or are scripting themselves, are coding themselves. But we need to live in a world where if you're protecting things, it's not just changes to code that fall in the last bucket. It's changes to anything code depends on, whether that dependency is direct or indirect. So if you want to change code, that's obviously in bucket number 5. But if you want to change a field that is used by code, or if you want to change anything that's referenced by code, you need to actually treat that change like code. And therefore, you can have different impacts on different things. The result of this is that you can have lighter approval processes, or even post-approval processes in some cases, for different levels of risk. And you can actually route the work to different types of people without necessarily clogging up your center of excellence. But because you have automated governance, or I would recommend that if you're doing this, you do governance. So I'm suggesting if you do governance of this type, that you automate it. You look at all the changes and you reconcile it to whether it complied with the process that was defined in your policy. And if it didn't, you need to be on top of that right away. Because people, the right way of doing it is to fill out a ticket, and then the ticket tells you what to do, and then you do it that way, and then you get the right approval, and then you get done. Well, if you didn't do it that way, or if the risk changed in the middle of you doing it, you need an automated governance process to warn management or warn the center of excellence and say, hey, by the way, these changes, they did not get properly approved, and therefore there is previously unviewed risk. Okay. So we're not suggesting in any way that people make their center of excellence more efficient by lightening its rigor. In fact, we're suggesting you make it more efficient by strengthening its rigor, by moving risk analysis. Risk analysis is the first question you ask, not the third question. And we're going to democratize the ability to do that so that people can understand when they don't need to involve the center of excellence. So what I'm going to do is then show you a few of these things. And these sort of best practices, you can imagine, can be done without StrongPoint. But StrongPoint has been designed to automate this, to make it extremely easy to set up a great process if you don't have one right now, and extremely easy for you to automate and make more efficient the process that you have now. A key part of this is that StrongPoint is natively built into ServiceNow and Jira, and Salesforce cases are just coming out right now, and we'll be supporting other ticketing systems in the future, because the best change you could make to make your change process more efficient would be the smallest possible change. So if you can keep everybody except for maybe the release engineers working entirely within ServiceNow or within Jira, wherever you work right now, that's going to produce a much better outcome for your team. But if you needed an entire process from scratch, you don't have one right now, StrongPoint also includes all the workflow that is normally provided by ServiceNow and Jira, including approval workflows and everything else, so you can actually basically roll it out right from scratch. And that's not that uncommon either. Let me pop over. I want to show you a few things. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the part of this is the underlying root cause of the problem. Right? The underlying root cause of the problem is that people do not have at their fingertips the right type of documentation to make decisions really, really quickly. And there's lots of different ways in which StrongPoint's automated documentation is used, but we're just going to talk about how it facilitates this process. Tremendously useful for troubleshooting, fantastically useful for cleanup and managing technical debt, but we're just going to talk about it from a risk point of view right now. And if you're interested in those other areas, by the way, We have lots of resources, a guide for doing it. Reach out to our team, we'd be happy to walk you through it. There's also an interesting white paper on citizen development, which, for many people was a great idea from Salesforce, didn't really take off for many companies because of the risk profile, but how you can actually use very much the same type of things we're doing right now to enable safe citizen development, or at least expanded development. In this case, I'm just looking at a automatically generated DRD of the account object. And in a demo, we'll show you how you get there in the first place. And in this case, somebody's just asking if they can change the company social media field. And what they really mean is, can they change the pick list, right? And in a few seconds, somebody's able to click on it, and they can also do it by just searching for it in the browser bar and going directly to it. They can see the same DRD, but just for that one object, or that one field rather. But they can see, well, we've got a few layouts that it's involved in. Okay, that's fine. And I have only a couple of reports. I wonder if this report has been recently used. Ah, wait a second. This report was recently used. Look at that. It was used on October 18th. So this is an actively used report. And but there's no other dependencies. There's no script. There's no workflow. So anybody joining your team, anybody from our team, anybody who's ever seen Salesforce ever, and most people who haven't, could actually make a reasonably good decision about the risk here. This is relatively low risk. Now, if they were to drill into it, they would be able to find out more information about the report and be able to look at it in more detail, because we've got full documentation. But that's sort of out of the scope of our conversation today. If, by way of contrast, if I was to pick a different field, and I'm going to pick the maintenance type field because I have to know that bad things happen as a result of this field. So, and I want to change this pick list. It's a completely different ball of wax. There's scripts, there's workflows. And so even though these are both fields, they're both pick list fields, although one is the dreaded multi-pick list. And they're both on the same object. They have dramatically different risk. This field, if changing the pick list, requires a full software development lifecycle, and we need to know what we need to regression test. The other field, you could have an admin do it. Frankly, you could have somebody change it, but this is a good idea. Somebody could change it in production and nothing bad would happen. But the more normal case for changing the data model, because we don't change the data model in production, is you could assign a BA or a dev to work with the business user in Sandbox and get it done really quickly, and then have a light change process through production. And nothing bad will happen, for sure, right? And so this visualization is really useful, but this isn't auditable or provable, so it doesn't really solve the problem of the center of excellence and the team that's running it, because you need verifiably sorted buckets, right? So what we have, and we have this both at the Jira level, ServiceNow, as I said, coming in Salesforce cases and other ticketing systems. We actually already support IBM Sightline, or Blue Wolf, formerly Blue Wolf Sightline, as another ticketing system, which is widely used by larger customers. In this case, somebody just fills out a form. I think somebody in the help desk fills out a form, and it immediately gets gated. So they've picked a report, and it says, look, this report is log changes only. It's the lowest level. You can actually mask these instructions, by the way, but none of our customers really do. They kind of like the technical explanation because it's kind of rigorous. But this report is totally safe. This report, which is the East Region KPI report we just looked at, that's being actively used, this report needs a change request. It doesn't need IT approval. It needs business approval. And so if you didn't go through and evidence the fact that you had approval from the appropriate people, which would be the owners of the report or their supervisors, normally, then you would then this would show up as a non-compliant change. So we're telling people the right way to do it at the Jira ticket, the ServiceNow ticket, or at the Sightline ticket, or in the strong point, in this case, a process issue, which is a strong point specific version of a ticket. And then we can think of a field change. Remember, we looked at the company social media field, and there was no downstream risk. And StrongPoint knows, right? StrongPoint understands that. And so it's saying to somebody, look, this is going to go down our sandbox development path. It's not going to go through the center of excellence because this is a small change that's needed by a particular group of people, and it doesn't have a downstream implication. Now, because this is natively Salesforce, you can impose rules on top of this, on top of our engine, and customize your rules in ways that are unique to the way your company operates. So this is not an engine that is just, oh, you have to do it the way we think it works. We have ways of configuring it inside our own application. I'll show you in a second. But we also have customers configuring it in very, very special ways. And for example, one of our customers, and this is becoming increasingly common relating to privacy legislation. So we have CCPA coming in the new year. We have GDPR that already applies to a lot of people. And what a lot of people start to realize is that those are actually governance obligations. They're not just, hey, will you forget my data and will you show it to me? In fact, that's not even majorly what they're about. What they're mostly about is demonstrating that you have tight control over private information. And so in this particular case, the customer said, I would like a special trigger to be put in place that assigns any encrypted field to a special policy where any code or anything else against it, it needs to be approved by the chief security officer, by the CISO. And the reason for it is when you apply code to an encrypted field, the data is no longer encrypted. You can read it, and therefore you could write it somewhere else, which basically, that basically avoids the encryption, which doesn't mean that that's actually happening. But if you're running a tight ship, you would want that review, but you don't want the CISO sitting there on every change saying, hey, can we change this layout? I don't know, what does the CISO think? The CISO thinks nothing. The CISO doesn't want to be involved. They have other obligations protecting the rest of your data. Turning on that function was like a few minutes to an hour, and they knew exactly how to do it because it's just simply, they walked themselves through it. We're going to create a trigger that does that. Now, other types of changes, we looked at maintenance type field, and we all looked at the DRD, and we understood that it was risky and dangerous. StrongPoint understands it's risky and dangerous too. And at this point, this is happening at the ticket level. So imagine somebody's on the help desk and there's somebody saying, can you change this pick list for me? And the person in the help desk is responding, I don't know, today on Slack or whatever, or on Chatter, saying, hey, sorry, Mary, I can't change that pick list for you because it's StrongPoint's telling me that there's a lot of downstream implications. So we're going to triage that for you, but that's not going to be the thing I can be super responsive on. If you asked for this change, it would go into, yes, Mary, I can change the company social media field for you. I'm going to have to do a little bit of checking. We have a sprint coming up next week to deal with these sort of small changes. I'm going to see if I can get that in for you. I'll be back to you later. This difference makes a massive difference in end user satisfaction and a massive reduction in stress, because obviously delivering this news to somebody when it's in fact this situation is an extremely stressful thing for the team. They go, I really don't know, Mary, I can't really tell you. We're gonna have to do a full run-up on it. I'm gonna see when we can get you in our run-up queue. The run-up is already done. The risk analysis is already done. We're ready to go. Right? Now, the other issue that comes up is that when people are being asked to approve it, the change committee is sitting there reviewing, or the Center of Excellence is reviewing someone's opinion about what the risk is. And that itself causes friction. Did you check this? Did you check that? Did you check this? Did you check that? Well, the answer has to be, yes, I checked everything. Otherwise, the decision is not confident. So you tend to see inside centers of excellence a lot of rerunning over things, because only a crazy person would approve something without understanding what the downstream implications are. And so when you actually get to a change request, and this could happen right inside Jira, ServiceNow, or in cases, or in our own interface, you can actually see the impact analysis. So here's a change request, and it's saying that it's supposed to go through a full software development lifecycle, meaning you're supposed to have not just the approval to do it, which is the first thing that the Center of Excellence will give. You need formal approval to move this into production. So you need a formal deployment record. And we see that what's on here, there's no code on here. There's just two fields we looked at, and that report that we looked at. And when we go to look at the impact analysis, we can see right away, there we go here. normally can see. Why am I not getting this here? Let's see if I have the full screen if I get it. Murphy's Law of Demos. Well, what we would normally see is the full impact analysis showing up. I'm not sure why it's not showing up at this moment in this demo account, but what we'd normally see is the full impact analysis. We would see exactly the same information that we saw back here that's explaining this. Now, the impact that had on one of our customers, Amex, was profound, because when they got down to that, all of a sudden management started asking better questions. So what actually started to happen was, initially when they first adopted the software, for a second it seemed like things were slowing down, because when they went to management went, wait a second, okay, now that we know what the impact looks like, why are you doing this? It's touching that really dangerous and important thing, because we're gonna have, if that thing changes, we're gonna have to retrain all these people. So what's the explanation for that? And what that caused, though, was a dramatic improvement in the actual work of the change team. And the downstream effect of that happened fairly quickly thereafter is that their error rate and their rework rate went through the floor. The secondary effect was they developed a way of talking about change and communicating change that was centered around the impact analysis. So they were able to say very, very quickly, this is this type of case, because now they're dealing with a defined way of understanding how you investigate change, and therefore they were able to standardize their responses. They would say, yes, this is this is this case, this is that case, this is this case, and their change process reaccelerated. But they got to keep all the gains on less rework, less stress, and less errors, right? Less problems in the first place. Now, the way in which this is configured is that we have policies, and it's actually a new version of these policies coming out, which breaks out even these permissions into different levels for breaking scripted things out to different levels. But I want to explain this one briefly. So we would all probably agree that scripted changes, which in this version of a policy means scripts and workflows and process builders and anything that touches any of those things, so any Apex code, triggers, anything that touches any of that stuff, that needs to go through full software development lifecycle. The challenge is knowing when to do that. But what we saw back in our process issue examples, StrongPoint already knows which is in which bucket. It knows this field is in the other change, the data model changes bucket, and this field is in the code bucket, without anybody ever telling it that. Right? And so that second change, the maintenance type, it changed the field itself, or the addition of things on top of the field are going to cause it to be that change to be classed as full software development lifecycle. And therefore, when the change is made, we're going to be looking for a formal deployment record after a formal change approval, which shows that it went through the Center of Excellence. It's a good idea, and it went through a rigorous release process. It was properly released. By way of contrast, the report and list view changes unless the list view is being referenced by a script, or unless the list view or report is being tied to a profile or permission set. It's going to basically be automatically cleared. So it's going to sort the wheat from the chaff. Now, what we can do is we can then assign other policies where this isn't true. We can say, oh, all these reports, like our protected report that we're talking about, we can make a special policy, and we can either manually assign things to it, or we can automatically assign things to it, like in the case of our encrypted field special policy, which got the special approval from the CISO. And we can also define other levels of control. So sandbox development testing needs a deployment record, but it doesn't need a prior change request. And the most important thing is it doesn't need to go through the Center of Excellence. It's already being pre-screened as being a light level change. Now, if you're going to trust a system like this, you need to audit the living daylights out of it, right? And by the way, you can imagine, that you can actually simulate this with people, right? You can do this gating with people. You just need people that have access to this kind of information. And so definitely in smaller orgs, what people do is they create this process, but they use this level of tool to do it. Because they're not public, they're not large, there's not large downstream implications. They're just trying to move quickly. As we move into medium-sized to large companies, that responsibility is too high, and they adopt our automated tools for doing each of these steps. The big thing that the medium-sized to large companies, though, need is to audit it. Because if you're going to sleep at night, you would want to know anytime somebody made a change and they didn't go through your process. So in other words, they made the change and there is no corresponding ticket in Jira. There's no corresponding approved ticket in Jira, approved ticket in ServiceNow. Therefore, there's no corresponding record of that approval in Salesforce through StrongPoint, and therefore we need to know right away. And what this will catch is things that are really dangerous. So, for example, if you had approval to change to add some Apex code, and you added Apex code to a field, and that field was not already scripted, then StrongPoint isn't going to care. As long as you had approval to do the code, presumably during testing, somebody figured out whether that was the right thing to do or not, and you got approval, so you deployed it, that's no problem. But let's imagine that in fact, you deployed it against a field that was encrypted, and somehow you slipped that in, and we would catch that, right? Or you deployed it against something that is already scripted, and you didn't put the field on the change request. Well, we're going to alert management to that, because if it was never on the change request, if it was never indicated to be an impacted object in change, nobody ever looked at the impact analysis. So nobody knows what the downstream risk of that is, and StrongPoint will automatically sort the wheat from the chaff, right? And what that does is it relieves the Center of Excellence from, well, it doesn't relieve them from worrying about it. It makes it possible for them to be much more confident about the decisions, because if for some reason something changes during the project that would cause increased risk, they're going to know about it. Now, our change requests are able to move through the environments as you move a project from a conception through the dev process, and therefore you can actually see this change happening right inside your UAT environment or your QA environment. So before you deploy to production, if you're running a reasonably rigorous process, you'll already know about that risk, and therefore it won't get to production. But we want as a backstop in production that we do this audit. So covered a lot of ground here today. The major principles that I wanted to leave you with were that if you want to make your Center of Excellence more efficient, you have to realize that safety or safer doesn't have to be slower. Safer can actually be faster, but in order for it to be faster, you need to automate each of these things. You need to automate your documentation process. You need to automate your risk analysis process. You need to automate the impact analysis process. You need to automatically monitor all changes and reconcile it against the approvals, regardless of which system they're happening in. And you then automatically need to clear non-risky changes out of the bucket so that nobody needs to worry about those things. And then you need to automatically impose release checks and controls. So we didn't cover release and rollback functionality in StrongPoint, but a release and rollback functionality that blocks things if they weren't approved, object or customization by customization, or blocks rollback if you're going to break things that you built afterwards, is also part of this whole thing. And finally, for those of you who are subject to audit or other compliance obligations, because we automatically do the reconciliation, it's going to save you a massive amount of grief when it comes to audit time. And increasingly, Salesforce orgs are coming under audit scrutiny, partly because of the expanded risk of privacy information, partly because of the expanded view of SOX and other regulatory audit responsibilities, and frankly, partly because people are using Salesforce more and more to do more and more mission critical things, right? And so all these things together are causing increased audit exposure. And the normal impact for our customers who do have audit, and for those of you who don't have audit responsibilities, you can think this is reduced management overhead, is about 90% reduction in the cost of preparing for audit, or if you don't have an audit responsibility, 90% of the amount of work management needs to do to run a really tight ship. And the usual impact for customers, not so much on the first audit, because the auditors want to know what the heck's going on, but certainly on the second audit, is a massive reduction in the cost of the audit. Because what are they going to audit? They're going to come in and go, are you running a tight ship? And you're going to go, yes. One of our customers, High Jump Software, their IT audit literally runs like this. Are you still running StrongPoint? Yes. Did you change any of your policies? No. Can you send us the non-compliant changes report with all the resolutions in it? And send us the report that shows any changes to your policies. End of audit, right? It's not that they never come back with a question about how you resolve something or suggestions about how you might tighten your process. That happens. But there's no, okay, great, send me all your change logs on everything and let me go through that and your JIRA system with a fine tooth comb.